So here are the two turtles that I'm going to talk about, and one of them is arguably one of the most beautiful turtles we have in North America, the ring sawback and the pearl map turtle. But to kind of give you some perspective, one thing that's really interesting is if we look at the diversity of turtles on a global scale, we really have three centers of biodiversity. One that you would expect, right? The Amazon. Everybody, when you think of global biodiversity, you think about the Amazon. But also the Ganges-Brahmaputra River of India and Bangladesh is another one. And then, of course, the southeastern United States. So these are three large centers of biodiversity, and we're talking about scale. The purples are 11 to 16 turtles in a single area. Over here in Bangladesh, up to 19 species in a particular small area. So relatively dense in terms of number of turtle species. So when we look at the southeastern U.S., we see that we're right at the smack dab center of turtle biodiversity. Sort of Mobile, lower Mobile, Tensall, drainage being the highest area. We're talking about 17 to 18 species. Again, up here in the pearl, 14 to 16 species. So I like to kind of give some perspective. Here's Millsaps, not far from the Natural Science Museum. And if we look at the turtle species in the Pearl River that only occur in the river, that rarely occur outside of the river, rarely in the floodplain, we see four species. The smooth softshell, the ring sawback, and the pearl map turtle. We have one non-native species that's actually here, and that's the Mississippi map turtle that has likely been released due to pet trade and people releasing pets into the river. And if we look in LaFleur's Bluff proper, and the ponds, the swamps, we have spiny softshells, southern painted turtles, common snapping turtles, mud turtles, alligator snapping turtles recently listed as federally threatened, river cooters, musk turtles, that's a razorback musk turtle, common musk turtle, the ever-present red-eared slider, and outside we see box turtles that my students and I have been tracking behind the museum for going on 7 years. So this is old red here. This is one of our old males that we've been tracking for that long. Okay, so 14 species within a couple hundred acres here: river, swamp, forest. And when we think about that diversity, we kind of probably take it somewhat for granted, because if we were to look at other places, so this is from Michigan's Department of Natural Resources, the entire state of Michigan only has 10 species of turtles. Okay, so for perspective, the entire state has 10 turtles. Right here in the LaFleur's Bluff and the Pearl River, we can see 14 species. It's pretty amazing. Okay, so we are very blessed in Mississippi and very blessed right here in the Jackson area to have as many species as what we do. So I really want to focus on these two species, the ring sawback and the pearl map turtle. So I want to take you through a little bit of a taxonomic history with both of these species, and then we're going to get more into sort of the surveys and information that we've gathered. So this is the original description of the ring sawback as Malacoclimes oculifera by Bauer in 1890. All right, and there's some things in this. Well, first off, this is the species description, 2 paragraphs. Most of the species descriptions that we see today come with genetic evidence, come with multiple pages of descriptions and bones and skeletons. And so this is kind of gives you some perspective as to the brevity of many of the old species descriptions. And I like to read this for you. This is one of the most beautiful of the American tortoises, and it is certainly very remarkable that it has not been described before. So even in 1890, remarkable that it hasn't been described. And sort of the basis of that were these rings that occurred on each of the costal scutes. And the species was reported, Gustav Kohn delivered them to Bauer, and it was Mandeville, Louisiana, and Pensacola, Florida. Okay? So just for perspective, and I want y'all to kind of keep those places in mind as we begin to talk about the species, okay? And if we look at their conservation status, sort of at the federal level, the state level, and then sort of the international level. Our federal government recognizes these as federally threatened. The state recognizes these as an S2, which is a high level of endangerment. And the International Union for the Conservation of Nature previously had them listed as threatened. They will be uplisted this next go around within the next couple of months to endangered. And I hope to show you why that transition has happened. Now, Perlensis has a little bit more of a circuitous path to its description. So up until the early 1990s, there was one large species that occurred throughout a large system from the Pearl River system, the Pascagoula, the Alabama, and the Escambia. And then Lovitch and McCoy looked at a bunch of these specimens and said, hey, there's actually a bunch of differences across these drainages. So they described, so previously it was Graptomys pulchra, the Alabama map turtle, and Alabama map turtle is now they described as only from the Alabama Black Warrior river system, Mobile River system, and then the Escambia map turtle over here, and the Pascagoula map turtle over here, including both the Pascagoula and the Pearl together. Okay, so this was in 1992, and then Josh Ennin et al. Came along and looked at genetic evidence, looked a little bit closer at the morphologies, the characters that we see on the external part of the shell, and actually these are two very different things. So the Pascagoula map turtle, Graptomys gibbonsi, is now only in the Pascagoula, and Graptomys perlensis as its own unique thing since 2010 in the Pearl River. So we went from this really one large-ranging species that many people thought, hey, this species is doing fine, to, okay, now we have 4 things, and they're not so fine when we start to look at them independently, okay? So one of the neat things, and I appreciate James's description of the geology of the river, these are very recent in terms of sort of their evolutionary trajectory. All 4 of these species are located down here. And this is in millions of years. So really it's over the last 750,000 years or so that these 4 species have kind of been sort of separated through time based on the best molecular evidence that we have. Okay, so a lot of people like to look at adaptive radiations, things like the Hawaiian honey creepers, Darwin's finches. I would contend that this is the Darwin's finches of the turtle world. These are very rapidly evolving and very interesting group that shows sort of that same pattern of very quick speciation through time. Okay, and their designations, they were recently proposed as threatened, listed as threatened by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They are S1, so they're the highest conservation priority in Mississippi, and they are also listed as endangered by the International Union for Conservation of Nature. Okay, so this gets into, okay, where do these animals occur? All right, so I'm going to kind of juxtapose Oculifera, so that's our ring sawback, to Graptomys perlensis. So we see that they occur throughout most of the Pearl River system from Philadelphia all the way down to the coast and throughout much of the Bogue Chitto River. But we also see them in some of the tributaries like the Yakanucany, Pelahatchie, Strong, and Hobolachitto. And I'm going to come to this one here in just a minute. This is something recent in the Bogue Falaya of Louisiana that I want to talk about. So just kind of keep that in mind. And then if we look at perlensis, somewhat similar. They occur a little bit farther. They occur a little bit farther up into some of these tributaries, the Yakanucany, the Strong, up a little bit further into Mississippi and the Bogue Chitto. But in general, a very similar pattern, except for perlensis occurring a little bit higher in the headwaters than what we see perlensis or see Oculifera. Okay, so I want to also talk about that too. Okay, so this was really interesting. This was in 21, where this turtle picture showed up on iNaturalist. And a friend of mine, colleague of mine, Brad Glorioso with USGS, saw this and said, "Hey, Will, what do you think? What do you think this is?" Like, it looks like a ring sawback to me. It looks like a female. And he got a couple more pictures, and they were certainly ring sawbacks. I'm like, "Where is this?" He said, "This is the bogue thalia." And if anybody's familiar with the bogue thalia, excuse me. Let's see. Sorry. Okay. So the bogue thalia is a totally separate river system from the Pearl. So here's the Bogachita, here's the Pearl River coming down, and here's the bogue thalia, relatively small. Bogue thalia kind of come together right around Covington. And of course, we went down in the fall of 2021, and of course, here they are, ring sawbacks. Collected tissue samples from about 20 or so, and we looked at the genetics to see, okay, first off, are they oculifera? Second off, how related are they to sort of the main stem pearl? And again, one of the things that's really interesting is that we only see them in sort of a relatively small area, just downstream of Highway 190 in Covington. If anybody's familiar, this is the roadside or Wayside Park in Covington. So this is the primary area, about 5 river kilometers, not long at all. And all of this, by the way, is less than probably a meter above sea level. So this is really low, really slow moving water. And this is kind of what that area looks like. Satellite imagery, there's that section where we found them. Okay. So this is somewhat interesting. If we go back to that original description, Mandeville, okay, we don't know where Gustav Kohn got the original samples from for oculifera that George Bauer described. Might it be that they came from here? It's not far from Mandeville. This is Covington. So we're not sure, but it seems possible. And certainly the Pearl River is not too far from Mandeville as well. So looking at the genetics, Daniel Gillard and Brian Kreiser and others looked at the genes for all the populations in the Pearl that we sampled. So from the headwaters, Carthage, all the way down to Napoleon, which is right down on the Gulf Coast, to Franklinton. And this is the bogue thalia. So what these charts are showing is sort of scores as to what group they assign to. Using the program structure, we can go, okay, how do these things best fit? And the bogue thalia is completely different genetically than the rest of the Pearl River. We do see a little bit of admixture. Admixture is where we might see potential mixture between the two groups, but that makes sense because Napoleon is right down here. Okay, so very unique, very different in terms of genetics, but phenotypically, the way that they look, almost identical. So I did some surveys in 2020 and 2021. This was during the height of COVID. I found myself just going out on the river and surveying turtles. I wasn't associated with people, so this was a good outlet for me during that time. So I surveyed in southeastern Louisiana. This is the ring sawback. The colors go from green all the way up to red. That's indicative of density. So we can see they occur in pretty good density in the lower Pearl as well as the lower Bogachita. And then if we look at Pearlensis, and so, well, I'm going to get to that in just a minute. So we found a couple little new drainage records. They occur a little bit farther south than we thought they did, but no real sort of difference from what we knew regularly. And if we look at the other species, Pearlensis, right, you see less oranges, less reds. It's a lot more yellows and greens. A couple new drainages where we found them, and maybe, only one spot that I could probably go and point somebody to and say, if you go here, you will see one of these. So this is one thing that I think is really indicative of the status of these two species. If you look at these colors, and from my own experience, I can tell you 20 bridges, 30 bridges that you can go to throughout the Pearl River system and you would see ring sawbacks, almost guaranteed. I can't do that with pearlensis. I may can tell you this one spot, but I'm not going to tell anybody what that one spot is. Okay? So this is just an indication of, again, sort of some of the differences that we see, and we're going to see that going forward as well. And before I get too deep into this, I want to kind of show you a little bit of what the habitat looks like. Most of these parts where we see strong numbers of both of these species, we have alternating sandbar and binway cutbank sections. So sandbars, the adults will come up and nest on the sandbars. That's only the females. The males basically never leave the water, okay? Unless they're going to bask, and that's where they bask, on these outer cut banks where the river is incising into the channel and the trees that are on the outer bank are falling in. And this is what you get. This is about the only time that you really get to see these turtles is basking on the logs. And they're not getting a suntan. This is a physiological activity that they're doing. They're raising their body temperature. So in this case, these are a lot of female ring sawbacks, so they can put more energy toward egg production, so they can have more eggs. They could be fighting an infection. So just like us, basking raises their temperature. We raise our temperature to fight off the flu and all the other pathogens that we get. Okay, so too do they do that. They also get vitamin D, just like we do when we're out in the sun. And so they have lots of things that are happening through this activity. It's not just catching the sun and resting and relaxing. This is an activity that they do. We can see right here, this is a small male, and you can see the size difference. Males are about the size of your palm. Females, about the size of like a dodgeball, volleyball. Okay, pearlensis, males slightly bigger, maybe the size of a grapefruit. Females like the size of a basketball. So very strong sexual size dimorphism between the two species. Two very different sizes. Males are a lot more spiny. Females have ridges. But one of the things I want to point out right here, there's a little leech that's hanging out on that turtle. And if he stays there long enough, it'll cook that leech off. Okay? The leech will actually self-detach from there because it wants to preserve itself, and bloop, it'll fall in the water. So that, again, this is another way that turtles can use basking in the sunlight to get rid of ectoparasites. And if we look at, so this is kind of the river proper, right? So that sort of description is this part of the Pearl River right here in the Flores Bluff. We have sandbars, we have cut banks, and then we also have these backwater sloughs, oxbows that form due to the meandering of rivers. And we sometimes see, not in high densities, but we sometimes see ring sawbacks that are back in maize lakes. After the river floods, they get caught in the back, they hang out for a little while. River floods again, they'll get back into the river. This is a juvenile here, really strongly serrated sides, really strongly serrated carapace. But if we look at the densities of ring sawbacks in the river versus in a lake, okay, we see dramatic differences between the densities. Okay, anybody heard about One Lake? I'm sure you have. Okay, so dramatic differences in those two different habitats. Okay. So this, and we, by the way, we don't see, at least today, we have not documented pearlensis, the pearl maps, in any of these backwater areas. Okay, so pearlensis, definitely not there, absent, at least the best that we can tell at this point. Ring sawbacks, a major drop off in densities. Okay, so this is one of the less attractive portions of the Pearl River. This is this channelized section right downstream of the museum here. You can see all the trees are removed and not super great map turtle habitat if I was to look at it. But guess what? They find stuff to bask on. They're there. And much to sort of, a difference between what was said by the proponents of the One Lake, they don't occur there. Well, they do. Okay, they are there, and they are in pretty good numbers. Not as good as what we would say is more natural habitat, but they're still in pretty good numbers. So if we were to look at the densities, so my students and I did this research in 17 and 18. Upstream of LaFleur's Bluff, we have really high numbers. So this is numbers basking per river kilometer. And then this is sort of middle section of Jackson. And then this is downstream near the Savannah wastewater plant. So we see a definite drop in sort of this really urbanized, channelized section of the Pearl. But these densities are almost identical to what we see in the Bogachita River, a natural river. So this is not something to sort of snuff at. This is a species that's very resilient to changes potentially in those types of settings, as long as the water's still flowing, right? Because again, if we were to look at numbers in lakes, we're talking, way down here. Okay, so that as long as the water's still flowing, we could put trees back on the landscape around there, trees fall in, and those numbers would pop right back up if that section of the Pearl River was restored. Okay. Now, if we look at, so this is ring sawbacks here. So this is basically this graph, and then this is pearl map turtles. In all the sections of the Pearl around here, they are almost non-existent. Okay, and you might say, well, what's the difference? Well, one of them, the ring sawback, eats freshwater sponges. That's one of the primary species that it consumes. Pearl map turtles consume mollusks, snails, mussels that are highly sensitive to any type of change in their environment, environmental pollution. So as a consequence, that these are more sensitive species to what we see compared to ring sawbacks. So if we look in, and again, this is now looking at what impacts would one lake have on these two species. Again, these are two federally threatened species, both considered endangered by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. So we did counts, and this is a lot of math that's involved, basically looking at minimum, average, and maximum counts in the different segments. So segments 2, 3, and 4 would definitely be impacted by one lake in the dredging and everything that would happen. 1 and 5 would be upstream and downstream of that, but likely have spillover effects. So if we look at the impact of one lake, the impact area, 1,000 animals up to almost 3,000 animals, ring sawbacks. And if we were to look upstream and downstream of those sections, another 1,000 up to 3,400. So we're talking 2,000 to 6,000 plus animals that would be affected by this. And we'll see in just a minute, this is the best population for ring sawbacks throughout its entire range. Okay, we're gonna look at pearls. Again, there aren't as many in there, but 25 to 170 in those three main sections that would be impacted, upstream and downstream. Another 100 to 350. So overall, we're talking, almost 7,000 federally, up to 7,000 map turtles that could be directly or indirectly affected by one lake. Now, Bob Jones, as well as Paul Hartfield, have been conducting surveys for ring sawbacks all the way back to the 1980s. So this is one species that we do have really good data on. And if we look at age at maturity, for males, 4.5 years. So they have to go through, little bitty males like this, have to make it 4.5 years in that river system with herons and egrets and muskrats mink and largemouth bass and gar. Okay, there's all types of things. But when turtles hatch, they're like the chicken nuggets of the river. Okay, everything wants to eat them. Everything wants to eat them. Okay, so it's a really long time to get to 4.5 years for them. Females mature at 9 years of age. Okay, so it takes 9 years for them to lay their first clutch. Okay, it's a long time. All right. So if we look at males, again, this is a really attractive male here. This is an adult. It takes them 4.5 years to get to adulthood. The average lifespan is about 8.5 years. Maximum lifespan, average 50 years, maximum lifespan. So across several sites, Monticello, Ratliff Ferry, 60 plus years old for this small turtle. Okay? So again, if you're thinking about getting a turtle as a pet, I don't recommend it unless you want to write it into your will. These things live a really long time. Okay? Females, average lifespan about 14 years. Average maximum lifespan across the sites, 75, almost up to 90. Okay? And this is not a big turtle. This is not a Galapagos tortoise or a big alligator snapping turtle. These are relatively small river turtles living, 50 to almost 90 years old. And all this was done from marking hundreds and thousands of turtles over 30 years. That's the only way we can get this type of really high quality data. Now, similarly, if we look, so this is again from Bob Jones and Hartfield data, in the 80s and 90s, all the way up to now. This most recent work was done by Macaulay Johnson and Noah Devros down at University of Southern Miss. So they went back to these same sites, did the same exact methods, mark, recite, so paint mark some turtles, go back and do visual surveys. And if we look across since 88 and 89 at these sites, 20% decline at Carthage being up here, 70% decline at Ratliff Ferry, almost a 50% increase at Lakeland, which is right here north of the museum, 60% decline at Monticello, and then this one's kind of an outlier. And it's an outlier because this, they sampled at a little bit different site. They sampled downstream of Bob and Paul's original sites. So if we were just to look at Bob and Paul's data, we need to come back and get another one here from their exact site. We're talking, 35% decline. So declines, except for this one spot right here in Jackson. This is the one spot that's actually increasing, the one spot that would be directly affected by one lake. Okay, so this is the best population now for the species. Okay, and if we look since 2008, 2009, we see declines at all of our sites, sometimes big, and an increase at the Lakeland site. Okay, so this is a lot of work that went into putting this together. Now, this is a combination of Noah and Macaulay's information from Southern Miss. So now we're looking at just basking counts, average basking counts for ring sawbacks, and then we're going to juxtapose it with pearl maps. So we can see, this is the largest population right here in our area. Downstream, a little bit of a lull, and then we get big populations down here from Columbia down to like Bogalusa area. We see actually in the channelized area, West Pearl River Navigation Canal, there's still some turtles that occur in there, and lower densities down at the bottom of the river. So bottom and top are lowest, and it's kind of spotty in the middle. Okay, pretty consistent though. We can go out there and we can see just about 50 or 60, along the river system. And if we look at the pearl maps, it's a little bit of a different story. Okay. Here at Lakeland, 218 per river kilometer, 2 per river kilometer. The largest population down here around Columbia. But again, not very consistent. Again, I challenge anybody to just say, okay, give me a spot that I can go to and I can definitively see these things. So very different, and I appreciate Noah and Macaulay sharing their data with me to allow me to kind of put this visual together. So what are the threats? What are the threats to these turtles? They're many, they're numerous, okay? When we start talking about threats, anything from mining and quarrying. So this is a gravel mine off the Bogachita River, and this is what happened. It collapsed. The levee around it collapsed. All of this spoil, this sediment from this gravel mining area spilled into the creek, and here's the Bogachitta River, right here. So that creek will flow in, but all of that will spill in. Huge amounts of sediment towards what James talked about, filling in that stream. Many of these turtles need deep areas that they can hide and have refuge in. Large dams, we know of them. This is the One Lake project. This kind of gives you a perspective. This is I-20, this is I-55, and this is the area where that really high dense population of ring sawbacks occur, right through here. Okay. Invasive species, right? So this is a Mississippi knife turtle. Again, because they're not very different. They're what we would say shallowly diverged. There's not many millions of years between them. These will hybridize with our ring sawbacks. And we actually have evidence of first generation hybrids because of the presence of a non-native species. So that could potentially affect the genetic distinctiveness of the ring sawback. Sewage, everybody knows this story, okay? All types of effects of sewage on not only the river and sort of human health, but also environmental health and species that are very sensitive, like mussels and snails, to those types of perturbations. Effluents, nutrient loads. We look at the top dischargers in the Pearl watershed. Thanks, Abby, for putting this together. Tyson Farms, Sanderson Farms, all types of effluent and nutrients that are being released into the Pearl and sort of changing the water chemistry, changing the homes of these animals. Soil erosion, again, the Ross Barnett Reservoir does a really good job at increasing levels and then shutting the gates off, and so these banks slough, they get too heavy and they slough off. And of course, sedimentation from many of those gravel mining operations. And of course, garbage and solid waste. This is an ever-present problem, even in some of the areas that you might think you are out in the middle of nowhere. Trash flows downhill. So this is an ever-present problem after any type of high rainfall event. So here's one of our marked turtles. So this is a ring sawback, and here's a pearl map turtle, just to give you perspective for size. That's a female, and these are females here. So with that, I'll take any questions you might have about turtles or other things. Paul?
You didn't mention the number of 22 rifles and teenage boys. Threats.
Yeah, it's on there. It's on there. Human harassment, for sure. I've seen it before, young teenage kids just going to sighting their rifles, just go shoot. Yeah, Paul?
It's not just teenagers. Any fisherman out there, every fisherman have a 22 and shoot turtles because they thought they were easy to fish. And we talked to so many fishermen trying to explain to them that these turtles were touching their fish, but it didn't matter. They just wanted to shoot anyways. But my question was, I recall, and of course this is just memory, I haven't done this for many, many years, that the Alabama maps were almost as abundant, if not as abundant, as the
in some areas. In some areas back in the 70s and 80s, it was a little bit more toward equality than what it is now. I just didn't have time to put that data in.
Did we not keep the data on the
So, Bob, so this is one of the things in talking with Bob, he did have capture data in terms of, it wasn't mark recapture data, but it was trap days, number caught per trap day. So we were able to look and over time, the number caught per trap day did go down. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes.
First of all, thank you for making the correlation between the impact that the One Lake is going or the proposed One Lake is going to have on the calculation of turtles. I did read that in the BIS. However, I wasn't familiar enough with what the role that it plays. So thank you for your presentation. The other question that I that rose to mind was, why are we seeing an increase in the population when our area is such drastic decreases in other?
That's a fabulous question. I don't really know, but I can visually say that in this area there are lots of juveniles. For some reason or another, there are lots more juveniles here than what I see in other areas. So there's more recruitment that's happening here for some reason or another. Something about nesting, something about the habitat that's leading to more recruitment. Maybe it was declining for a while, and there's open space now for that recruitment to happen. So that's anecdotally, that's one thing that I can say. There's lots and lots of juveniles here compared to other areas that we've looked. Yeah.
What does their nesting predation look like? Do you have any studies on that right now?
Well, so a lot of the data that Bob collected up in the Rattler Ferry area, we're talking most of the nests get predated every year, right? It's not uncommon for turtles to have 90 to 95% nest depredation. Okay, and that would be bad if turtles only live 5 or 10 years. But because females show no signs of senescence, no signs of menopause, right? Females produce all the way to the end. There was a recent turtle, a Blanding's turtle that was, I think, in her 90s that had a clutch of eggs. So if you have a reproductive lifespan, if they mature at 10 and they live to be 80, that's 70 years. And all they really have to have is one successful clutch, and one of those juveniles make it to adulthood to replace her, right? So that's a huge, in some ways, an advantage for turtles, is that they do live a long time. But yeah, predation is probably 90 to 95%.
I'm working with ASTs right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What about sex ratios? Are y'all seeing?
Sex ratios are really hard because seasonally, females will bask a lot in the spring because they're wanting to put more energy to eggs. After they lay their nests, they're not basking much in the fall. Males will start to bask in the fall because they're undergoing spermiogenesis for the next spring. So you'll see there's a little bit of a difference. That's why marked individuals are so important. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you showed populations of both turtles below and above the Ross Barnett.
Mm-hmm.
Are they able to transverse that?
To our knowledge, no.
Okay.
But this is a very recent thing, right? The reservoir's only been there since 1970. So in a turtle scale, that's only like 2 generations time. So that's not going to have any effect on genetics, at least at this relatively short time scale. If we were to go out 1,000, or so years from now, maybe we're talking about, some disconnectivity that's happening. But right now, yes, there is a physical barrier there, but there's no signature that's showing up that, at least genetically, that we can say that there's a difference, upstream and downstream of the rest. Good question.
But the slide you showed where it showed the declines above the reservoir, Rattles Ferry and Carthage and above and south here. And the increase here, could boating traffic be responsible for that?
So there is potential for that.
Here.
And again, this is a supposition, a speculation, and I don't know this for sure, right? But the Pearl River was about 30 miles of the Pearl that was dammed for the reservoir. Those turtles had to go somewhere. Okay, so they're not going to live. So I suspect many of those turtles moved north up toward Rattler Ferry. So that area was artificially high because of the reservoir. And just through time and through attrition, it's kind of come back to carrying capacity there. So I think that high number at Rattler Ferry was probably just as much a signature of the Ross Barnett and individuals trying to find moving water. Because we see, them moving up into Pelahatchie Bay, Pelahatchie Creek as well. So that's a good question. Okay. Is that it? All right. Great. Thank you all. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.